Okay, so everybody, this week we are looking at boundaries, and this is something that Beck and I have personally been working with recently. We work with them all the time, but there are times in our lives when we really have to kind of make them strong. That's something I've been doing definitely recently, and I know Becky's been working with that a little bit too. But we thought they followed on really nicely from values because once you know your values and you're kind of practicing them, it takes boundaries maybe to keep to your own values and not be sort of pulled off path a little bit by external influence. So we thought we'd do an episode on boundaries and see if we can kind of shed a little bit of light on that and offer some tools both from psychology, yoga, and astrology. So, Becky, what is your personal experience with boundaries?
Mm, I personally have really struggled with boundaries a lot in my life. And really, to go straight into the astrology for me, I have Pisces in my seventh house. And for anyone listening, wherever your seventh house is in your chart, as in what sign is ruling that house, and any planets there as well, um, kind of is the energy of how we meet someone else because the seventh house is all about our relationships, our one-to-one relationships, and how we meet the other. So I have Pisces there, and Pisces is not the best with boundaries because Pisces energy is all about dissolution and like how our human connects with spirit. So the gifts of that are like, softness, compassion, all these like lovely qualities. But the shadow of it is always compromising yourself, always never saying no, always taking on one more thing and not honoring yourself. So Virgo is opposite of Pisces in the chart, and Virgo is about truly being of service. And how can we be truly of service? Well, that's about looking after your own energy and your body and all of those things. So I think I've talked about this before, how kind of my patterns are very much like self-sacrifice. Um, so yeah, I have a lot of experience with boundaries, obviously something that my soul desperately wanted to experience in this lifetime. And I've got better at putting boundaries in place as I've gotten older, definitely. Um, but what I really don't like are like very hard boundaries. And I get sometimes they're necessary for safety, if we're recovering from abuse or trauma or something like that. But I really feel like when they're the default, we have very rigid boundaries. They actually cut us off from intimacy, from deep feeling, from the ability to be spontaneous, and from nuance as well. So, yeah, I feel like if there's no flexibility with a lot of boundaries, you can sort of lose the ability to respond in the moment. So I guess I really have played with this a lot in my life about boundaries being about control. Um, but for me, boundaries about trying to have I would call it like optimum connection. Where does that boundary need to be with that person, with that situation, with that yoga pose, in order to have maximum connection with self, and maybe with the other person as well. So I feel like I've already gone off on a massive spiel there about boundaries. But what are you feeling about boundaries?
Always the wisest spiels, though. I love the spiels. The boundaries for me, yeah, it's similar in the way that I feel I've got better at holding my boundaries with age. And interestingly, I'm not sure if that's an age thing or actually a self-worth thing. So for me, boundaries and self-worth really come hand in hand. They say that actually boundaries can be like a mirror of self-worth. So if we feel that we're worthy of respect, then we'll set boundaries to protect our time, our energy, our well-being. But if we secretly believe that we're not enough in some way or that love is conditional, like we've spoken about before, then we'll struggle to hold those boundaries because we'll overgive or people please or tolerate like a certain treatment just so that we get, love. And that obviously comes from early parenthood. And I'll share later a little bit about some of these theories, the psychological theories that contribute towards boundaries. And they say, saying no is kind of saying yes to yourself, isn't it?
Mm.
Saying like, I matter. So, for example, like saying no to extra work when you're exhausted means you believe that your rest matters just as much as productivity. But low self-worth can make no feel dangerous because we feel as though people are going to abandon us. Um, but then if we're too rigid, so exactly like you say, like everything, isn't it, health-wise, it's about finding the balance. So if we're too rigid, sometimes it's because we have like a fear of vulnerability. And so we put these walls up. But in a way, whenever we put walls up, it's like a prison, isn't it? And we imprison ourselves on our own. And so it can be quite lonely. And we can feel massive disconnect if our boundaries are just too strong. It's almost like a self-protection thing, not letting other people in, and not allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Because the fear again, or interestingly coming down to I'm not good enough, but looking very different, is like if I let someone in, are they going to see that I'm not good enough? So I'm just going to keep them there. I'm going to keep them, with my walls up, because then I can uphold whatever image I feel like I need to keep myself safe. So a lot of this is coming either way, coming down to this work of really like authentically feeling that you're enough as you are and doing the work through any of those samskaras, those limiting beliefs around yourself to say otherwise. And either way, that can show up as overgiving and having poor boundaries, or maybe having too strong a boundaries and protecting yourself too much to the extent of kind of loneliness and disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I know I've reached out to you before when I've been in the thick of it with boundaries. And I feel like my struggle with boundaries sometimes comes from, I don't know, it's like this empathy that I know comes from my Pisces placement of like so deeply feeling what the other person is feeling that I want to help them. That I can like really feel it in my body and be like, I know the solution to that, which is like my Virgo first house of then like wanting to help and wanting to be of service. And so for me, it's always, yeah, this constant balance of like checking in with, okay, I'm really feeling what that other person is feeling and I really want to help them. But okay, like what are my energy levels right now? And where is this coming from? So I know, yeah, I went on a bit of a journey with that earlier this year. And I think we talked about, yeah, like as you've said, really, with parents and things like that. My experience growing up was very much feeling responsible for my mum's happiness, and I still feel like that to a certain extent now. Um, and so behaving in a certain way, doing certain things, hiding even certain parts of myself so that it wouldn't upset her or so yeah, I can relate to everything that you just said really strongly.
Yeah, and this is where I think it's like the beauty of how all these tools come together is understanding astrology enough to know, like, my south node is that I would overgive, or for me, so yours, Becky, being around this like deep empathy and then really feeling like you need to help and having the solution, and mine being a lot around like duty.
Mm,
Like no matter what, I'll be of service because it's duty, and duty is like so important to me. And we can see that in my chart to the extent like I'll make myself ill, I'll burn myself out just to be to stick to duty because it feels like the right thing, the good thing. But when I could do that forever, but because I know that that's in my south node, and I know my north node is moving towards, like we say, enlightened selfishness. So like selfishness for the greater good, but moving towards self rather than others, duty, then I sort of know where I'm going. I've got my map. But in order to fully kind of embody that, we do have to explore ourselves and the psychology within that. And some of the psychology that we're talking about here, so attachment theory, which people might be, familiar with, and a top line summary of some of these. So if we had secure attachment, it's the idea that caregivers who are loving but also respected our space, so that we'd be able to grow up and say yes and no in a balanced way. If we had anxious attachment, then we might feel like love only comes if we please people, which is certainly my experience. And that can lead to weak boundaries, saying yes when we want to say no, or avoidant attachment. So we learn to protect ourselves by pulling away, which can look like rigid boundaries. So we can see how those psychological theories like directly impact what we're struggling with. But at least with astrology, we know what we're trying to move away from and what we're trying to move towards. Interesting, there's interpersonal boundary styles, which it really like puts theory to what we're talking about with balance. So if we have rigid boundaries, then we have like a brick wall around us, like we spoke about, keeping people out but keeping yourself isolated. If we have porous boundaries, then we have like a fence with holes, so people can step all over your space, you overshare, you struggle saying no, you feel guilty protecting your own energy. But if you have healthy boundary styles, then the gate that opens and closes, so that you're able to, decide what comes in and out. It's flexible, not too hard, not too soft, which is exactly what we've just spoken about. And then you have codependency and family systems. So families teach us a lot about our boundaries, and some are enmeshed, which is where basically everyone's in each other's business. You might feel responsible for other people's feelings or guilty of having your own. And healthy families allow differentiation, so being close but also your own person. And that, like in adulthood, that shows like being able to love yourself deeply, as well as others, so not kind of losing yourself when you're in relationship with someone else. And there's a few more. So you've got Deepening and Ryan, which is about self-determination theory. So humans thrive when three needs are met. So we have autonomy, so choice and independence; competence, so feeling capable; and relatedness, so feeling connected to others. And boundaries are what let us balance those three. So if we don't have boundaries, we lose those, and that is what can lead to dissatisfaction, discontentment, anxiety, whatever it shows up as. But with them, we feel free or confident and connected. And then most people will have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is basically this understanding that we have like these basic needs like safety, food, shelter, before we can reach the higher ones or self-actualize, like self-esteem and fulfillment. And boundaries are part of those basic needs. So being able to say no to things that are unsafe, people or situations, gives us safety. Or like friends and family, we have a sense of belonging, so we feel safe. So it's only really when we have good boundaries that we can feel safe, and only when we have those basic needs met that we're then able to move up, that pyramid towards self-actualization. So might be boring for some, but I always find it really, again, just useful, just tools to kind of have, okay, yeah, I can see that's a framework. Whenever I meet a framework, I kind of have this big exhale of like, I'm not mad. This is something that is common and there is a name for it. And thank goodness, I find a lot of comfort in that, as well as obviously what we've spoken about with the astrology, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's always validating, isn't it? When you find a model or you read a book and it's got a name and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I've been feeling and going through. And I don't know, it legitimizes it in some way.
For sure. So, Beck, what about the yoga practice? I mean, all types, but I think Yin's probably pretty good at giving us an actual tool, something to practice and something to do to help us with this, yeah?
Yeah, I feel like yin is amazing. I always say this, but you've got the time in the poses and lots of time as well to get in and into the pose in the first place. So, what yin can teach us is, we move into a pose, and I always try and cue it to say, like, stop when you meet the first point of resistance and feel, what do you feel? And that's like your first boundary, isn't it? And is this what I want to be feeling in this pose? And if it's no, because it feels too intense, then you back off. And if it's, actually, I'd like to feel more today. You can move more into the pose. And so you're upholding that edge, that place where you're feeling enough sensation, but you're able to soften and relax into the pose. And that's almost like what you want to do in life, isn't it? You want to meet that edge of like, yes, this boundary, this place feels like the right place. And then in yin, we have the time within the pose to explore everything that we're feeling, the level of our muscles and joints and bones and ligaments, but also emotionally and mentally, like what is going on in that pose, in that moment, on that day. And we sort of get to experience then what time does with this boundary that we call the edge in a yoga pose. We get to feel that. How does it feel to be there for 4 or 5 minutes? And we learn something about ourselves in that process. That either we can stay with a pose when there's a lot of sensation, or maybe we can't on that day. And maybe that's a reflection of where we're taking too much on in our daily life. I know when I am, I don't know, moving through a lot, when things feel intense, I do not want necessarily lots of intensity from my practice. And so if I'm feeling more intensity, if I'm doing a yin practice, it's probably also showing me where I've got a lot going on off the mat as well. So yin is, yeah, really powerful for creating that connection, and literally showing us the sort of physical boundaries in our body. And of course, we get that from a flowing practice, but I think it's just different in yin with the way that you're setting up the pose and, being very intentional about what do I want to feel here. Whereas I think perhaps like vinyasa can often show us, I don't know, it shows me more perhaps about my general mood when I do a vinyasa practice. What do you think with yoga?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right. I think yin has more time to speak directly to kind of educating around people. How much do you want to give in this pose? You've got time to be in it, to reflect, to think about it, to feel. Just like, yeah, maybe more time to explore boundaries. For vinyasa, I feel for me, it's like, well, I think it's the first entry into yoga a lot of the time. So I think you can kind of start with just a general reflection of going, do you push too hard during this whole practice, or do you hold yourself back? And where else do you do that off your mat? And why? Are you pushing yourself so hard because your self-worth is attached to achievement? Or are you holding yourself back because you're protecting yourself from failure or in some way? And so for me, it's like just kind of dropping those questions in as they're kind of pulling and pushing through the flow of the sequence. But it's a dropping it in every now and then and like raising questions rather than kind of giving yourself time to sit with it and explore it and play with those edges like you would in a yin class. But I think, yeah, essentially like any form of yoga, the posture is showing us our body's edges and knowing, like us being able to reflect and see when we push or pull back is teaching us boundary awareness. So it's like experimenting with our boundaries in a safe place and doing it with our body rather than it can be pretty complicated kind of experimenting this with people because there's an emotional backlash or guilt or communication or self-questioning, whereas when it's just with your own body you're kind of learning like in that safe space going, oh yeah, no, that did feel too much, or like actually I think there is a bit more I could give there. So it's just the practice ring really to then go and like do that afterwards in your relationships, but also energetically, like our prana, our breath is a boundary. So they say like when you lose your breath in a yoga class, like because you're pushing too hard, and just that awareness really of like, okay, yeah, I'm pushing too hard, I'm giving too much. That as a practice of stepping back and observing self is something that is so useful then to take off the mat, just to even be aware, what am I doing boundary wise here? Like, am I feeling knackered and depleted because maybe it's a boundaries thing that maybe hasn't even been a question before, and noticing breath in a class can give us that self-awareness to regulate. Um, and yoga in itself is a nervous system regulation. So in that way, it calms our reactivity. And when we're not reactive, then we can make much more conscious decisions. So we will be noticing and choosing consciously what we're going to do with our boundaries, if we're choosing to give or not, and like considering self-worth within that, rather than just kind of like blindly going through life like over giving or under giving and just not being aware or able to self-soothe enough to make a conscious decision. So I think when we are able to self-regulate through yoga, we can just be more conscious about that off the mat generally.
Mm. It's funny, isn't it, with the breath? Because I think before I'd done a yoga class, I don't think I'd ever really paid attention to my breath in my life. Isn't that like crazy to even think about now? When the breath is just this amazing, powerful tool. Well, it's the giver of life. I mean, it is the ultimate boundary, isn't it? Because the first thing you do when you're born is breathe in, and the last thing you do when you die is you exhale. It is like the weaver between the human experience and the soul. So it's really powerful. Um, but when I'm teaching a class, very often the first thing that I'll do when people arrive is like get them to notice their breath and what is their breath showing them? How is your breath? You know, is it nice and smooth and steady and deep, or is it a bit more shallow, a bit more jerky? Like, what is the quality of your breath? And like, once you become aware of that on your yoga mat, I just think it changes everything in your life because then, I don't know, you're sat in the dentist waiting room and you're like, oh, like my breath feels really jagged or, whatever, because you're feeling on edge. And so you start to use your breath as that barometer to notice, okay, what's going on at a physical level that I'm not maybe consciously aware of right now, or maybe I am consciously aware. And what does that mean? You can sort of then bring that back to your boundaries, can't you? If you're feeling on edge and your breath is going crazy every time you go to work or every time like your Teams call goes off on your laptop, what's that telling you about your life and maybe what boundaries need to be in place or what needs to change?
Oh, absolutely. Breath is so underestimated. And especially when we're talking about boundaries and self-regulating to be able to make these choices of when we open the gate and don't open the gate. I know last week, like, was just so much going on, and I taught a really late yoga class. I'd had a migraine during the day because I just had too much on. I was teaching 7 till 9. I had to be up in the 4 o'clock in the morning to go to a corporate event. And it was my breath that got me through that. And I know that sounds really cliche, but I was like, to get rid of this migraine, I'm going to have to sort my breath out. And, to get in this car and drive and keep myself calm and focused on what I'm going to present on and all of this, like, I'm going to have a really good anchor of my breath in the next 48 hours, right? At least I can't let that go out the window, or the migraine's going to come back, or I have a panic attack. Like when I'm right on the edge, I'm like, all right, like you've got to really be masterful of this now. And it's funny, I had a voice note from somebody the other day, and she was studying pregnancy yoga, and she said, can you talk to me about your births and how you think that yoga has helped them? And like, for me, it was the breath. And my midwife, I mean, I don't think she was anything yoga trained, but she said to me, oh, my baby was £9.30. Like, Lenny was huge. And we obviously did not know that at the time. And she was like, okay, his head is huge. Like, you have got to listen to me. When I say breathe, breathe. And when I say stop, stop. And I had to be so able to go, okay, like, keep calm. I've got this breath. This is something I can do. And like, breathe that baby out, And I just think breath is so powerful, and we really underestimate it in terms of self-regulation. And yeah, yoga gives us, the opportunity to really get a handle on that. First, become aware of it, and then use it in a way that gets you through poses. The only way you can take flight in poses and things like that and rock it is like mastery of your breath. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on breath, Beck, but it definitely plays into boundaries, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So then other areas of yoga which are brilliant for boundary practice is more the kind of philosophical side of it. So obviously there's the eight limbs, um, for those of you that aren't familiar. So there's the yamas and the niyamas, which is what we're about to talk about, the philosophy, the first two are what we do and don't do. And then the third limb is the asana, what we've just been spoken about, the poses. But then as we move through the pranayama, breath is a whole other limb of yoga. So yeah, interesting how the so far the asana, the poses, the pranayama, the breath, like all so directly into play, into tools as to how to manage boundaries, how to self-regulate, but also the philosophy, the first two limbs of yoga. We have our ahimsa, non-harm. And it's this saying no to what harms us is practicing our ahimsa, non-harm. You've got svadhyaya, which is this self-study. So this awareness of ourself, of our patterns, like David Attenborough, kind of observing ourselves and going, wow, like so interesting. Why do I do that? Where did that come from? And then santosha, contentment, trusting enough to hold boundaries without guilt. So there's also the philosophical side of yoga, which gives us, the tools and the frameworks to understand and practice boundaries too, right?
hmm Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because in an ideal world, like if we were all living perfectly, we wouldn't need any rules, we wouldn't need any guidelines. We would, because we'd just be living in a way that's like aligned. And it's funny because in my Mary Magdalene training that I'm doing at the moment, and probably people will know of the Bible, like there's the Ten Commandments, right? Even if we're not religious, uh, we've got the Ten Commandments, but actually, what Jesus said, and let's not forget, like he was like multi-faith. Yes, he was born into like Judaism, but then he went and traveled. And actually, what he said is, we only need one rule. Well, it's kind of one and a half rules, and that is like love everyone, love your neighbor, love everyone like you would love yourself. And then the second rule is forgiveness. And I often think like how that really comes back to ahimsa of like non-harm, because ultimately that's love. Um, and then satya, which is truth, because we forgive people because so that we can come back to our truth. Because if we're harboring those feelings of betrayal or hatred or whatever might be there that we need to forgive someone from, we're disconnected from our own truth. Like we've got a boundary there, like almost with our soul, that's not allowing us to fully live our dharma. So when we can forgive, like we can come back to truth. And also, I think like truth there is, perhaps at a more esoteric level, is believing that really everyone does come from love eventually. If you go back far enough to source, everyone comes from love, and that is the truth. So I find that interesting, when you look at how those roots of like ahimsa and satya are also mirrored in so many other cultures and by by like these master teachers as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And something that I didn't mention, but that you've mentioned, part of the frame of yoga is satya. So is this truth? But it's something that I have like recently and have struggled with in the past with boundaries is when people say, what's your gut telling you? So you're trying to decide what you want, and then you can kind of deploy your boundaries, is like usually my process. But it's the deciding what I want bit that I find really difficult, because when my sense of duty is like so strong, it's really hard for me to feel what is right, because it almost feels wrong going against that. So then how can I deploy my boundaries, because I don't actually know what I want in the first place? And it's interesting, like what you said, like we shouldn't really need all these rules. We should be able to feel it. And for me, that's kind of, what we're trying to work towards is really knowing ourself well enough and being connected enough to self to even know what that thing is in the first place, to then be able to deploy the boundaries, which I think is challenging, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yoga, right, it's yoking, it's this connection, isn't it, of all parts of yourself. But I also feel like it is, it's this connection of the human part of you with the divine, with your soul, with whatever your mission, your purpose in life is. And so, yeah, for people like stumbling across yoga, they're going to need these rules. I know when I learned the 8 limbs of yoga on the teacher training, it was so powerful. And then you realize, when you look back on it a few years later, like you are living that way. But we need the rules because we are human and because we come in with karma and things to be healed within us. So, everything you're talking about, this need to be dutiful, this need to take care of other people, and really this sense of responsibility that comes through is something unhealed within you, at a soul level. And so, yeah, life is throwing all this stuff at you, so that you can heal it. So we attract the very circumstances, usually the hard things, so that we can heal them.
Yeah. And what we will, I'm sure at some point back, we'll go into more detail about this. Yeah, what's going on for like me at the moment. But it's certainly like, I think the beauty of knowing this information. So yoga, and it like for me it is yoga, and within that, yes, yoga means yoking and union connection, and astrology falls within that of like real connection, real understanding of why we've been put here, what are the lessons that we're trying to move away from and towards, how can we grow. So we've got the direction on our compass, but then all of these tools to help us get them, to get there. It is just one like long journey of connection, isn't it? But being able to like be surrounded by people like yourself and this knowledge, when I get to these like pivotal points and go, which way do I turn, to have these frameworks and go, look, like this is what's in your chart, like these are the theories that are going on for you right now. This is why you're struggling, and these are the tools that you can practice to help you through. Like, I mean, nothing more valuable, right?
Mm, absolutely. And it's funny because I was one of my friends voice noted me this morning, and she quit her job a few months ago, didn't have anything to go to. And what she has discovered is how much she loves art, and she's doing like all this art stuff. And she's like, I feel this is like part of my next thing, my next iteration. And it's like, she's really got in touch with that stuff within her soul mission and pulling it through her. But she had to create the space to do that. She had to have the boundary to say, you know what, like this job is absolutely killing me. Her health is so poor. And she's put that in place. She's put some focus on her health, but she's just doing this art. And now she's like, oh my God, like at some level, I feel my next role is going to be more creative. And but what she was saying to me was the judgment that she's getting from her parents and also her boyfriend's parents as well. Well, her boyfriend's dad. And she was like, oh, they're being really judgy and, they're trying to give me all this advice. And I kind of said to her, the thing is, like, our parents' advice is like 20 years out of date. It's advice that they needed to, at the point where the world was, when they were at the same age we were or younger. Um, and you should just ignore it. Like, ignore the advice. And I would say that to anyone, often we come up with like what we think is a crazy idea. It's radical. Like, we're going to let go of something that we've created, or we're going to quit our job, or we're going to leave our marriage, or whatever it might be. But we just feel it. We know it at a soul level. We know it, but it's so uncomfortable for our human. But do it anyway, and don't take the advice of people who have lived in a world that's changing. And it's through people actually following their dharma, following that soul call, that we will change the world. And that means people's boundaries are going to be different, and people's values are different. Like her values, my friend, have completely shifted in the last few months. And now her boundaries look different. Maybe she's going to uphold more boundaries so that she's got space to do these creative projects that she wants to do. She's already said, like, I need to go to work because I need to earn some money, but I'm not going back to work full time. And what I want to do, she's like, I love jewelry. So I've approached like these artisan kind of jewelry shops, and I'm going to see if I can like just go and work in them in the lead up to Christmas. And so like her values have just completely shifted. And it was just so inspiring to hear from her. Um, so yeah, like upholding our boundaries to reinforce the values that feel right for us can still feel really uncomfortable for our human self.
I hear you. I really do. And yeah, I can empathize with that so much. It's interesting. I think for me anyway, like creativity has been a real marker for that. So I found I haven't been able to be creative for a really long time. And like I'd go as extreme as apart from this podcast, which is like honestly such a breath of fresh air for me to speak and like share. Like I feel like I hide a little bit of my opinions and maybe social media or like the work I do in some ways because I'm preoccupied with like my duty elsewhere, and that has been really draining for me. And I haven't felt that I've been able to be creative. So I think creativity is a really good marker of like, are you drained? Are you overgiving? Are you, too much in another area? And you're right. It's like when you are around people who have kind of been brave and have taken that leap and are in their life's work, and energetically the frequency is so high and so they're more successful at it because they're attracting that frequency. But the creativity and the truth that comes through in those messages is just so powerful. Like you can't pretend any other way. But it doesn't make it easy to get there, right?
No, and it's interesting you talk about creativity, and of course, like the sacral chakras associated with creativity, but it's the womb space. The womb is the ultimate creator of life, and that's why it's so powerful. And that's why, yeah, goddess culture was so prevalent for so long, was like the magic of the womb that no one understood, like how these babies came in. They didn't actually understand that men were like part of the creation of the baby, which is crazy because of what we know now. But yeah, it's like to be connected to that portal of creation. You feel it and you know when that current is moving through you. And also like when we're in the thick of motherhood, especially like early motherhood, we've created these beautiful beings that we have to take care of. That takes a lot of our energy as well. And this is one of the reasons as well why like perimenopause and menopause is such an important and crucial transformation in life in woman, is because all of that energy from the womb no longer needs to be channeled into the children, into creating humans, into creating these adults that are gonna be able to go and live their dharma in the world. There's a reclaiming of that energy back to self, and a desire and a need to put that creative energy somewhere else. And if we don't do that, well, maybe we've seen that happen to, women in our fields who are older than us. If you don't use that creative energy, it like eats you alive and you become miserable and cantankerous and resentful. But if you can spend that energy, as you're moving through perimenopause and menopause, if you can create a business or volunteer or whatever, that create art, whatever it is that's flowing through you, it's so powerful because we're no longer having to be stuck in the kind of mother archetype of looking after children. And that's true even if you don't have children, because often in our 20s, our 30s, our early 40s, we're still in the mother archetype of like maybe starting to create a home or a marriage, or it's all about a lot of giving your energy to other people. And then I know this happened for me, as I went through menopause, perimenopause, I've been very much like, oh my God, I just feel like I've got more energy, not less energy. And through that sort of created my business and took myself in a different creative direction. Um, so, I think it's also like then how our boundaries and our values can shift at different times in our life. But also, I wanted to speak about this, like how our boundaries need to shift at different times of the year. Yes, like in terms of summer and winter, even in winter, maybe we need more time inward. And I think we even talked about this on our Christmas episode last year, at a time when we're kind of in that maximum darkness, is not necessarily a time when we want to be going out and doing all the things that we have to do at Christmas time. So, like having boundaries around that, but also even with our own birth chart, um, only this week. So, my birthday is in 6 weeks' time. And I was like, right, I'm going to completely shut down my calendar now for bookings for November. So, I've got a couple of things in, but actually, not many people booked in. And I'm like, I'm going to completely shut down my calendar on the month before my birthday because I know my energy is going to be lower. I know that I'm going to just want to go like more deeply within. Um, and so I've created those boundaries for myself to sort of, yeah, like look after myself in that time. So astrology can be really powerful for that as well. I think we did talk about this last year, with your birthday at the end of December, and you're like right in the thick of Christmas. But yeah, different times in our chart in our own year have a different frequency, and there are times when we need to perhaps have stronger boundaries about what we give to other people at those times of year, and also other times when like our energy is going to be like very powerful and wanting to give it out freely and have softer boundaries. So that can be really interesting to look at in your chart as well.
Yeah, and I think it's the knowledge that gives us expectation management. It's the knowledge of that that goes that don't expect to be like smashing it every day. It's actually not right. It's not natural, and like what you're going through is right for where you're at right now. Um, so and I really naively thought, I remember when I left advertising and like took that leap, and I remember going through like similar feelings to what I'm going through now and being like, oh God, this is so hard. Like I'm only ever going to do this once. Like I've jumped now. Now I'm like in the world of like wellness and I've done it and hurrah. And like kind of here I am again. Like, so I think it's also just staying really open and really in tune to what's going on, because it isn't like you're only going to have to make these big decisions once in your life. It may come up in a new form and you're still going to have to choose, you know, with all of these things in mind, right?
Yeah, get comfortable with it, right? Because that's the only certain thing in life is change and is sometimes expecting the unexpected. I think also just to say, every year is different as well. So if you have a solar return reading, which you do around your birthday, it can tell you the energy of the year ahead. So I already know, well, I only briefly looked at it, but next year, my whole chart is ruled by my 12th house of solitude, of going within, of like that connection back with spirit. Um, and so I already know like next year is going to look different and feel different to this year for me. And the things that you're talking about, yeah, I like really feel how that's going to change things for me as well. So yeah, it can be really interesting to just use your chart in that way to manage expectations, but also to accept like there's beauty in years that are slower. Um, and sometimes we've got to integrate the things that we've learned or um, have a quieter year than a year maybe like where we're out there killing it and I don't know, getting promoted or whatever it might be. Every single year is different. And then that weaves in as well with the collective astrology of that year. And, the next 2 years, if you include this year, we're in this period of massive, massive change of massive disruption, with a lot of people letting go of things, of karmic cycles ending. And this is so that we can create something new. So, this is another reason why sometimes, like, I think boundaries are need to be changeable, is because really life spirals, doesn't it? Something you think you've healed, oh, you haven't, but actually maybe I don't need the same boundary around that as I did last time I experienced something like this. It looks different, and we're just in this constant spiral of like evolution, really. And every time we go around and revisit something we thought we'd healed, actually we realize how far we've come as well.